Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Tuesday, this week with Joe Auslander. Hi Joe, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, thank you.
So it's Tuesday, and on Tuesdays we talk teams. Before we dive into teams though, we do want to know, what was one of those books that you still have in your shelf maybe, but you remember as one of the most inspiring for you as a Scrum Master?
In the beginning, I read a lot of books on Agile, and they all became foundational for me in many different ways. But I have to say the one that really resonated the most with me and the one that really changed my approach was Agile Retrospectives by Esther Darby and Diana Larsen.
What was it in that book that became sort of a foundational moment for you?
I think it was the well-explained approach to designing experiences for a team around a particular outcome or function. It was a little bit of psychology, a lot of purpose, and many layers of design in which you could interact with. They had these 5 stages of the conversation that were very easy to understand, and then they dove into each one and showed you through that really, really, really loose framework, stable but loose framework, you could fill it with so many different experiences, and just the theme of each really rolled into the next. And I took that knowledge of theming the conversation, like what's the pattern of the conversation that's meaningful, and I've applied that in so many different ways from there. And also I just fell in love with retrospectives in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a foundational book for us Agilists and Scrum Masters, particularly as it became, although many don't remember perhaps, but Scrum didn't have retrospectives in the beginning. But retrospectives they took a life of their own. They kind of spread very fast throughout Agile teams all over the world, eventually becoming a standard part of Scrum.
Totally.
So on Tuesdays, we also talk about teams and how sometimes they trip themselves into problems. And we want to explore one of those stories, Joe, one of the teams that you work with. And what was that, those steps, those small changes that happen over time that eventually led to problems? So walk us through that story, Joe.
I have to say, I have been very fortunate to have almost always worked with pretty motivated teams. The people on the teams have never been an issue in my experience. What has been an issue is the environment typically in which they sit and sort of the support they may or may not have around them or the messaging given to them. So I guess the example that I'm thinking of offhand is I had this one team who was amazing. They were all really good at what they did. We had developers, we had testers, we had a BA, we had a product owner, and all of them very enthusiastic to get into and learn from sort of the process and get into Scrum. We started to visualize their workflow, and we started to see very quickly that, to put it their way, is that the testers were a bottleneck. And I'd come from a pretty cross-functional, cross-skilled full-stack team. And so I immediately kind of knew that this problem was more in their head than it was in reality. And so what we did is we basically used the visualization of work. We mapped our expectations and we'd bring it into the retro. And they even articulated that the problem eventually, they articulated the problem wasn't that testers, it wasn't the problem with the testers, it was actually the problem with the way the work was being stacked. It took probably about 1 or 2 sprints until I asked the question, why hasn't anybody here considered sharing some of the load on testing? Why is it called testers' work? And at that point, they're like, oh, we can't do that. No, we can't we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. And after some digging, what I found out is they had, the testers had KPIs. around solving bugs and discovering bugs. And there was an assumption, and it wasn't entirely an assumption. It was an almost enforced rumor that testing work was testing work and development work was development work. Now, the director of testing didn't believe that should be true, and the director of development could be convinced otherwise. But it took a few months before we started to look into how they were being motivated and got the messaging right from the people that were in charge of developing their technical career. And at that point, we saw a lot of change in other teams. Before that point, though, I asked a few favors of them, and I said, well, before you lay anything down, can we use this team as an experiment? Can you guys just say, hey, we think that maybe this is good for all if the testers weren't just testers, maybe they're test leaders. And maybe there are some things that you can help them with and you can finish up on and get them to check out versus having to do all the testing themselves. What we found was that it brought the team closer together. Their work definitely flowed better. And surprisingly, not really to me, but to them, is they found it actually made them better developers. Not because they weren't brilliant, they were all brilliant, and not because they didn't have the technical skill, they did. But what we found is the relationship of sort of throwing it over the fence to the tester made them a bit lazy. In other words, rather than just doing a few spot checks on their work before they handed over to the tester, they were using the tester to basically do the spot checks for them. And so something that could actually take them 5 minutes was taking anywhere from a half hour to an hour because of the process of giving it to a tester finding it, and then giving it back to them to fix. And so what they found is it increased their flow greatly. It also made it feel better. And the planning became dramatically better as well. And the whole team kind of pulled together around that.
That's a great story. One I hope will inspire our Scrum Master friends out there to bring those ideas, maybe even share this episode with the team or the leaders and have that discussion. Because what you just described in my own head, I take a lean perspective when it comes to process and managing the work. In my own head is that by breaking or by making a very strong distinction between developer and tester work, what we are creating is a handoff, which in lean terminology means a delay and potential round trip addition to the process, right? So you do something, you send it over the fence, as you said, and then you get it back, and then you have to do it again and send it over the fence again. And if this happens a couple of times, you just wasted a whole sprint on small things that could have been done in a few minutes if you had done them yourself.
That's exactly it.
Absolutely. A great story. Thank you for sharing that, Joe.
Thanks, Vasco.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.